enough. And those frail little stems can only grow so far because they're just super weak stems. So we would move them around a lot. So even the ones that were in the deep pond every winter, we pulled them out, stuck them in super shallow water in February or March, waited for them to come up, and then when they were growing, we stuck them back in the deep pond, and just kind of moved them around wherever they would look the best.
Wow.
Yeah.
When you buy a plant already done, how deep do you plant it or put it?
You're gonna want it, well, you have your pond and you want it where you want it.
Right.
But the pads have to touch the surface when you put it in. So long as they're touching the surface, if that's where you want that plant permanently, great, put it there. And if that's 2 foot deep or 4 foot deep, you don't care. But if they can't touch the surface, then you need to put them in the shallows where they can until the stems are growing and spreading, and then stick them where you want it. Yeah. And keep in mind, they're coming out of 18 inches here. So if you buy a plant early in the season and it's in 18 inches, so it probably is okay in 2 or 2.5 foot deep, but that's it. Late in the season, those tropicals are spreading the entire 8-foot tank. By the time you buy it in August, you might buy a tropical that you could go stick in 6 feet of water at home because the stems are already long enough, but early in the season, they never would be. Yeah.
Because that was always the number of 16 to 18 inches was odd.
Sure. That's so to my understanding, that's a Japanese thing, which is perfectly great because if you do it the way they do it, obviously you're going to be successful. But most of their Zen gardens and koi ponds are also super shallow. They're all 2 foot deep or less. Environments, the way they do things, they don't have the predator issues that we have because there's not that many outdoor in the middle of nowhere koi ponds like we play with. They don't have, it's just different. But so yes, and every plant's gonna love 18 inches of water. But
But you can do it.
you can do it a lot deeper, and most of our ponds are more than 18
Right.
at some point. So yeah, but yeah, the only thing you really could be wrong is if you put a tropical super shallow, then in the heat of the summer, the sunlight can actually burn the heart out because it's only 6 inches of water on it, and that water, that's just too intense of direct sunlight. Otherwise, yeah, 18 inches is great. Yeah. Okay.
You're saying we're gonna move these suckers.
You don't have to move them at all. It just depends. I mean, if they're happy, don't move them. But if you buy a little plant and it's not big enough to go in the spots you want it to go, then you're gonna have to start shallow and move it and get it there. But a lot of people like to put the plants in the shallows anyway and leave the deepest spots for your fish to be. No, your plants are fine in the shallow in the summer. Just don't put tropicals in 6 inches of water. Super shallow. To Keith's point, if everything's in 2 feet of water, you're golden. But you have a bigger range if you want a bigger range.
How long should you leave them in the shallow before you move them into deeper? If the leaves are on the surface, then when do you know to move them into the deeper water?
Yeah, so, I could drop this plant in to my pond into this deep of water. That's the longest stem I've got, right? And if one's on the surface, I'm okay. Well, depending on the time of the year, but let's say it's growing season, let's say it's June. In 3 or 4 days, this stem's gonna grow another 6 inches.
Wow.
And these pads are gonna start, they're gonna all reach, and then they're all gonna start spreading. Well, so long as one is still touching the surface, as soon as it starts spreading, I can move it in to another foot deeper and let it go back down like this and still be touching the surface. And then I can move it again. So you can move it 2 or 3 times each week, weekly for 2 or 3 times, or wait a month and move it. It just depends how fast the stem is growing, which is gonna be determined by how warm the water is and how nutritious the water is. Make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. There's no, the cool thing about water lilies, most water plants, the water lilies, there's no set rules. There's parameters that they need, but there's no set rules. You don't have to do this way. You don't have to do this at this time of the year. You don't have to, it's just, be smart. Don't dry them out. This guy's not real happy with me because I'm drying them out, And if Miguel never liked working in August and September in the lilies. It wasn't because it was hard on the lilies, because it's hard on the person.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, we would do that. We'd go in, especially September, because you got an October koi show, and we'd go in and we'd start gutting them. But he and I would basically the plant would never leave the water. We'd go into an 8x8 tank, and he'd be on one side and I'd be on the other with new pots and new whatever, and all your work's in the water. You're doing everything in the water, moving it into the pot. The plant never got dry because it never really left the water. but you moved it, you cleaned it, you did, and it was perfectly fine even in the worst part of the year. You can do it in the winter, you just don't really know what you're doing in the winter because it's dormant. But you could do stuff in the winter. You just have to be spending extra time and looking for potatoes instead of just working with greenery.
And freezing your hands off.
Yeah. Okay, any other questions or anything I didn't cover for lilies?
Very good, very good.
When's the time start?
Great question. So, rule of thumb is you feed them during their growth seasons. So once you start seeing greenery come out, you stick in a fertilizer. When you see them starting to die off, normally in October, November, after the first or second almost freeze, you stop your feeding. Having said that, if they're in a big pot and there's room for those roots to grow, I already said this, the roots grow during the winter, just the top classes. So if you want a bigger, better plant the next spring, you feed them every month all winter long. But if this is already a full pot of roots and it's fairly root bound, you don't want to keep doing that because you're burning the roots with that fertilizer. So you really need to make sure I got a big enough pot and enough room to do that this winter, but your plant's going to kick off faster, grow bigger faster, and bloom more the whole next season if you fertilize all winter long.
Now, what kind of fertilizer types do you use?
I use Agriform. Okay, there's other kind of lily fertilizer tablets. Some of them are small. Some people use tomato spikes. It's not really that important what you use, except that it needs to be time released, and it needs to be something that goes into the dirt and slowly releases, so you don't muddy up the water with too much nitrogen too fast. You don't use liquid forms. You don't use, you know what I'm saying? You don't put a handful of granulars on the top of it because that, that's just going to dissolve super fast. So it's got to go into the dirt. It's got to be time release.
And it's one a month?
With Agriform, generally it's one a month. Some of it depends on the size of
And we
it.
pots and we always put 2 in there.
But you use 2-gallon pots, right? Or bigger, so that's 5. Lotuses take 4 or 5 if you want. But they're all in bigger pots and they're bigger root systems. And so it's all these things. You can't put too much in there so that you burn the plant. Be a little careful with that.
Have you ever figured out how to get dirt down to a plant in the water without it spreading? Just wonder if it happens every year,
Can't think of a good idea for you right now.
The best I can do on that is you fill your pot with dirt and you let that sit in the pot. Then you bring the plant to the pot.
Right. Well, and
That's the only thing I can come up
I don't know how to answer and actually give Keith a good answer, but what we do is we'll do several hundred at a time in the spring, and we'll fill all the pots with dirt already and have them sitting there, and we'll put hose water on them, and that creates a mud, and it takes the dust away. And then we put the plant then we put the plant in and sand coat it, or put the little pebble rocks or whatever you're going to put on it, and then when you go to the water, you don't drop it in, you set it angled, and you slowly ooze it, and that way the water slowly goes over the edge, and it creates less of a flume. And if you're slow when you're angled, you'll have minimal flume, and then you're okay. But you wet it first before the plant goes in, and you angle.
Well, we've got a little swimming pool, 3-foot kid's swimming pool filled with cattails.
Okay.
The dirt's almost completely gone. I would like to put in 4 inches of dirt, but it's 6 inches below the water. Is it best to turn it into mud and just drop the mud in there?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Probably so. Although whatever you do, it's going to settle eventually anyways. But
I want to settle in
the mud is definitely the way to go. Yeah.
I've seen also on a pot with holes in it though, sometimes you put newspaper or plastic.
Yeah,
stuff
we put newspaper
in.
to stop up those holes.
Don't escape.
Yeah, so it doesn't escape. And that's a really good thing to do. It also helps control the roots from getting too crazy if you want to have a better controlled environment. What I really like, I grabbed this pot because I was, it's easy to work with. But what I really like is, like I said, I use those wider tubs personally. And then I've also used the canvas square pop-up bags. I love those. No holes, water goes through the canvas. It can be square, it can be round, it moves with the root system. And it's a little wide. They come in 3 sizes, but it's a little wider, so it's easier to put rocks on the top, and you're not in a rigid pot that only gives you this as an option. Super like those, and $4 a pot, and they last for years. I mean, it's not like I'm buying a pot. That's stupid. I should not spend money on pots.
Was he here?
Yeah, but then they last for so long, it's like, okay, I didn't really spend $4 for the pot, I used it for 5 years, it's a free pot. So those, I like those a lot better than these. And I think I have to redo my pond some with plants and everything this year, so that's probably what I'll do, is I'll use a lot of those.
Why do you use newspaper rather than plastic bags at the bottom?
Plastic bag's fine.
Same.
Okay.
It doesn't matter. We have an endless,
Sorry, idea.
yeah, endless supply of newspapers.
Newspaper would fall apart.
It does, but it literally falls apart and dissolves into nothing in the water. So you don't notice that you did it.
What if the water lily is sprouting out from one of the hoses on the 1 gallon that was tipped over? Do you cut it out and
I would.
pot it?
Well,
Or should you
Yes.
leave it alone? Because
You
it's
can.
already growing already out of it, right?
leave it alone. If you decide you want to do something, then you're going to snap that root off and you're going to set it up and you're going to massage and reset it. But, you know, if you don't care what you're looking at, or you can't really see the pot anyways, there's no sense in it. The plant's yeah.
Okay. If I'm going to pot, I put paper on the bottom
Mm-hmm.
and find the soil or talk about the
There's
soil
dirt.
and then set on the top.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. And don't use superfine, don't use the kid sand, you use coarse sand, or use pea gravel, or use little rocks and pebbles. Because the fine sand, after just literally a few weeks, will just turn into the mush of the mud. It just dissipates in. And so then you're like, no more sand, now I have mud pot, and now the fish can kick the mud up into the water. So you need something a little,
Okay, so pea gravel.
yeah, I like pea gravel better than sand. We use sand here as coarse as we can buy because of price, because we might use 10 yards of sand in a year. And so you can't go buy bags of pea gravel and spend thousands of dollars on rock. That doesn't make sense. But personally, I would use pea gravel.
Very
Plants called another question.
Oh,
What if
yeah.
I was gonna do aquaponics?
Okay.
And I was gonna put in a little 4-inch and some, styrofoam.
A floating bed?
And what would you put in that 4-inch? I figured that'd be big enough for the roots.
Sure.
And I was gonna put it, what would you put, what kind of rocks or sand would you put in there to grow a lettuce or?
So we did this, I don't know if you know this, we did this for the Japanese tea gardens. They hired me to build 20 or 18 floating islands. And- huh?
I've seen those.
Yeah, and so we designed those because they wouldn't let me permanently attach anything to the structure. So everything had to free float. But they wanted islands to protect the fish and to bring in plants again, and there was no way to bring in plants with fish eating all the plants. So we got the super high density aquaponics foam, and we cut holes, and we stuck the pots in, and there's this stuff, it's a
Those red
microglyphs. No, it's a plant. It's a water aquatic planting media made by microglyph, and it's little bitty pieces of clay. So it's a bag of looks like a bag of gravel, fine gravel, brownish reddish clay, and we poured those into the pots. And so the roots have their little clay environment, but the water is free flowing through the pot,
And they're hanging down below.
and they're hanging below it, right? Because they have a little lid. So we cut the hole. And then the pot fit in the hole, but the pot also had a flat lid and 2 little handles. And so that would hold them in. And so every